Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says it's time to make things right with President Trump after their clash at the White House on Friday. He said he would work under what he called the president's strong leadership to bring lasting peace, hours after Donald Trump suddenly announced that he was pausing all military aid to Ukraine. The US is by far the biggest single source of military aid to Ukraine. Here, the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, welcomed President Zelensky's steadfast commitment to securing peace. Here's our international editor, Jeremy Bowen.
A Russian drone penetrated air defences in Sumy in northeastern Ukraine. Without American missiles, this will happen more. Stopping weapons shipments for Trump is a gambit designed to force Ukraine to accept his view of peace, which is looking more like Russia's than Ukraine's. Even so, Ukraine's European allies have pressed President Zelensky to offer Trump an olive branch, and he's obliged. On X, a promise to work for a limited truce under what he called President Trump's strong leadership. We really do value how much America has done to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and independence. The shouting match at the White House, he says, was regrettable. It is time to make things right. In Washington, Vice-President JD Vance, who once said, "I don't care much about what happens to Ukraine," said they needed more from President Zelensky.
The public stuff doesn't matter nearly as much as what are the Ukrainians doing to meaningfully engage on what a peaceful settlement would look like. We need the Ukrainians privately to come to us and say, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is how we're going to participate in the process to end this conflict. That is the most important thing, and that lack of private engagement is what is most concerning to us.
In London on Sunday, Keir Starmer and other European leaders agreed to find a way to offer President Zelensky a route to peace with security guarantees from Europe and the US. Britain's Prime Minister is trying to satisfy Donald Trump without betraying Ukraine. He says it's not an either-or. It might be. Europe and the US are now on opposite sides of the argument. The arms suspension will delight President Putin. This was the Ukrainian territory Russia controlled just before the full-scale invasion 3 years ago, and this is what it has now, about 20% of the country. President Trump has already said that President Putin can keep at least some of it. Now, President Trump's peace proposal includes US access to valuable deposits of rare earths and strategic minerals. He's refused Ukraine's request for the US military to guarantee its security in return. It seems clear that President Trump's priority is restoring US relations with Russia and not Ukrainian or indeed European security.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
The shouting match in the Oval Office last Friday ripped away any pretense that it will be easy to bridge the gap between peace and war. Donald Trump's attempt to force President Zelensky to do it his way has plunged America and its NATO allies into their worst crisis since the alliance was formed just after the Second World War. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Our North America editor, Sarah Smith, explained how quickly US aid could be turned back on if they're receptive to President Zelensky's comments.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Very quickly, presumably, because they just paused everything where it was. Any munitions or anything that was on its way to Ukraine just stopped, even things that had already made it to Poland. So they could turn that back on very quickly. But we haven't heard yet from the White House what they make of this statement from President Zelensky. And it will all hinge on what Donald Trump himself thinks. Does he feel that this is an apology that he can accept, or does he want to see Mr. Zelensky eat more humble pie in public before he's prepared to give him a seat at the negotiating table again? We have heard from the Vice-President JD Vance, who has told reporters that essentially it's more important what happens in private conversations and whether in those conversations President Zelensky can convince the administration that he is ready to seriously talk about peace, to tell the White House what he wants, what he needs, and demonstrate demonstrate his commitment to this process before they start talking to him again. But in his favour, Donald Trump is very keen to get on with this quite quickly. He wants to sign that economic deal that gives the US access to critical mineral deposits in Ukraine as fast as possible. And he has said himself he thinks that peace in Ukraine can be achieved either very soon or not at all. So he is anxious to get on with this process, and therefore it may be possible that it starts up again pretty quickly.
Briefly, if you would, Sarah, a lot of people still trying to understand why Donald Trump is taking this approach with Ukraine when he doesn't seem to be taking a similar approach with Russia. We saw, for example, in the last 24 hours or so, the US removing those cybersecurity offensive policies against Russia, when lots of experts are saying, look, this leaves the US open to potential hacks from Russia.
Yes, and there are even reports that the White House is drawing up plans to alleviate sanctions on Russia as well, something else that would be favoured by Vladimir Putin. And this is what people are asking. Are we actually watching America changing sides in this conflict and backing Russia against Ukraine? Or is this simply Donald Trump's admiration for a strongman leader in Vladimir Putin, who he thinks holds more cards in these negotiations, and that he's trying to make Volodymyr Zelensky understand the position that he's in, the poor negotiating position that Donald Trump thinks he has, although, of course, that is further hurt by the withdrawal of American military aid. So, yeah, policy seems to be being made day by day here in the White House, and many of us are trying to work out what the long-term implications would be.
Sarah Smith, our North America editor.